Our theme tonight is translation and manipulation, or translation and transformation of culture. The entire program will follow in the following days. We have a full program here that you can take it, and please take as many as you want and give it to your friends. So for tonight, the discussion will be moderated by Stewart, and I would like to invite him and our speakers to sit. And so Lucas Stewart is British Council Literature Advisor. He moved to Myanmar in 2011, and his presence here is commissioned by English Pen and Swedish Pen. So he has a very strong relationship with this space that is hosting us today. He's working on a very big project related to ethnic literatures, and his experience has a lot to do with translation. And I don't want to talk much or say too much about the topic today. I think our speakers will develop these issues related to translation from many different perspectives. I just want to quickly introduce our speakers by showing some books. So this is a book written by Sanchaung, our host today, president of PEN Myanmar, and the title of this book is Sanchaung in St. Harvard. You probably all know about it, and I'm showing you this because this is the Burmese version. This is the cover of the Burmese version. There's already an English translation which is under the process of editing, so we would like to hear about this experience of translating a memoir, a prison memoir. Then I have this very precious book because it was impossible for me to buy it here. I think it's possible to order it from Amazon, but I ordered it from Amazon in Italy, where I was more sure that it would have been delivered. There are, of course, poems by Zeyar, Lynn, and he also contributed to some translations. So this is my personal copy, but you can look at it. It's here for consultation. And another book from a very interesting publishing house called Eras. This one contains poems by two very renowned poets, Mo Wei and MGP Min, translated by Zeyar Lynn. And then we have here a big collection of publications by Myanmar Knowledge Society. As they are pretty new, it's 1.5 years they are working, we decided to offer to our audience several of their publications so that you can have an idea of what they are working on. And we also have some books from Wildlife Society, which is the publishing house of our third speaker, Aung, who is editor at Myanmar Knowledge Society.
I'm just going to project my voice, which I think is probably a little bit easier. Like Ilaria said, my name is Lucas Stewart. I'm the British Council's Literature Advisor. Most of my work is directed at a special project called Hidden Words, Hidden Worlds, which supports freedom of expression in ethnic minority language literature. Which is why when Ilaria and Thomas invited me to moderate this discussion, I was very interested and honoured, because translation plays a major part in what we're trying to do at the British Council, what personally I'm trying to do. Translating from ethnic minority languages, such as Jingpo, or from Sagor Karen, into Burmese, and then into English. And I'm coming across all sorts of problems, so I'm hoping that tonight my three distinguished panelists will be able to help me solve some of those problems. There's just a couple of rules I'd just like to explain before we get down into it. Because this is a round table and not a lecture, and I think we really want to see this as a sort of open forum of discussion, you, the audience, are more than welcome to contribute to this exchange of ideas and this exchange of opinions. So if you have a question, or you have something you want to contribute, just hold on to it, and at the end, we're going to have ample time for you to engage with our panelists. I think in the first half, we're going to have a quick look at the role translation has played in the historical evolution of Myanmar literature. So we're going to be looking at pre-war, post-war, post-88 translation. And then in the second half, we're going to be looking at how the individual translator can play a role in where literature is today in Myanmar, where it's going to be in the future. Okay, so I'm just going to very quickly introduce, and then we're going to give them a lot more time to explain themselves. So this is Aung Thura, writer, translator, MKS assistant editor. Dr. Thida, a woman of many talents, doctor, activist, political prisoner of conscience, editor, PEN Myanmar chairperson, PEN International Award winner, I could go on. And then sitting over there we have the legendary Zeyar Lynn. Poet is not strong enough a word for Zeyar. He is the champion proponent of the language school of poetry and widely regarded as one of the best poetry writers in Myanmar today. So I thought I'd just start off with something easy to ease the panelists into it. Perhaps we can just have a deeper look at who the panelists are and maybe some examples of how translation has played a part in their lives.
Good evening, I'm Zeyar Lynn, and like Lucas said, I have translated quite a lot of international poems into Burmese, including Sylvia Plath, Wisława Szymborska, John Ashbery, Transformer, Dean Young, quite a lot. Not only Western, but also Chinese, Japanese. And to answer this question, what or how translation plays in my life is, once upon a time I was working in the English department at Yangon University, and there was this professor who taught poetry, and a lot of students came to me asking me to translate those poems into Burmese because they could not understand those poems. And so, hello? Sorry. And so my students asked me to translate those poems into Burmese, and that was how I became a translator, and that was way back in like 1980-81. So I started translating from English to Burmese, and later on, I translated from Burmese to English, but I'm stronger at translating from English to Burmese because, for one thing, I am not quite happy with the way I translate from Burmese to English itself. If you have a look at these, this Bones Will Crow, this anthology of Burmese poems, you will notice that if you write Burmese too, if you can read Burmese too, you will notice that there are slight differences between the original Burmese and the English version. And when I met Gogote and Jane Byrne, they asked me whether I was happy with the translation, and I said, what can I say? Translation is always a problem. It's always a challenge. It depends on where you stand on translation, whether you stand on the side of verbatim translation or translation with a certain degree of poetic license. And I stand on the side of poetic license. And there were some poems originally translated by Gogote, which were polished by James Byrne. And I looked at both versions, and I knew at once that James' version was much better, because James happens to be a native English speaker and a poet himself. So he was more capable of fine-tuning the original Burmese translation. So that's why I understand that I can never be as good an English translator as James Byrne, because I'm not a native speaker. So I think I'll hand over the mic to Siama.
For me, I think I have been reading a lot of translated literature since I was young, and that's truly affected me, my perspective towards translation also. And I wonder, I really want to read some books in original, and I started reading in my late 20s. So at that time, I have been enjoying reading the original, but I wonder how we can still maintain its style in it when we translate. So the way some our senior translators have been working on this issue is so much interesting and like teaching to me. And then after reading a lot in its original, and then I started traveling, I think the way, for me, translation, it's not only purely transliteration from one language to the another, but it's also truly a transformation of the culture. Until and unless we don't know the culture of both languages, this work cannot be a good translation. That's why after traveling a lot, and I have more confidence to translate from English to Burmese. But to be frank, whenever I translate my work from Burmese to English, I feel I lost. That's why in order to do that, and I decided to write my very first documentary fiction book in English by myself. I don't want to translate. That's for that reason. So back to my prison memoir. First of all, I decided to write it in both languages. But you know, it's really hard. I need to go all the way through not being arrested yet to my prison experience so and so. I cannot go in both languages. For that reason, I decided to let the others translate into English. So for me, translation still matters. And now I recently finished translating a book written by a Palestinian engineer, and she herself traveled into Israel, crossing the checkpoints of the Israel, and that experience, that kind of book, I really want to introduce because it's related to the history of the translation in Burma, and we never been exposed to different kind of the literature in the world. So translation offers to me, it's both, not only personal, but also in order to promote our Burmese literature. Maybe I can tell later more.
It's very pleasure to meet you all. I'm really happy to be a speaker together with them. Actually, I'm not really satisfied with my society. Actually, our society is really superstitious, and I cannot stand it. That's why we need a radical change. That's why I translate. So for me, translation is a transgression, because translation is between the power of knowledge and the discourse. That's why we need to transgress. So from where I stand, and the translation is a transgression. And that's why I translated, and I've been translating Osho books, and Osho is an Indian philosopher. And I'm also interested in post-structuralism too, because I believe they can change our society. So I've been translating that kind of books.
Okay, thank you. I think probably at this point it's important for the audience to get a feel of not just literature now, but literature in the past. So I was wondering if maybe Zeyar, Lynn, you could maybe just inform the audience a little bit about your knowledge of translation in Myanmar, maybe sort of pre-war or post-war.
1968 was an unforgettable year for our Burmese poetry, because during that year, in 1968, two books were published. One was called Poetry, Imagery and Rhythm in Burmese, and the other was an anthology of translated poems called Tin Yu Ping Ye, Under the Shade of the Pine Tree by Sanchaung. The first book was by Sanchaung. And because of these two books, Burmese modern poetry evolved. So in a way, you can say that translation played a midwife to the birth of Burmese modernism. Some nationalists or some patriots were not like that because they would say that no, Burmese modernism came from Burmese poetry, but that's not true. Because we know that if say Aung Tano's anthology had not appeared, there would not be any models for Burmese poets to write modern poems. So that's the importance of translation in the evolution of Burmese modern poetry. And I have also translated what is called language poetry and other post-modern contemporary works from by American poets to Burmese. And that has sort of opened the way for the younger generation here in Burma, for the Burmese poets, to strike out their own ways because they've read that these things can be done in poetry, that they don't have to follow the traditional way, or they don't even have to follow the modern way anymore. So in that way, translation has been crucial in developing Burmese poetry up to now.
The history of translation in Burma started like part of our movement to gain independence. The Negani Book Club, it's a very first step of the mass translation to educate people to have knowledge what's going on in the world. But unfortunately, after independence, we were under socialist regime, so even for the translation, most of our translation in socialist days is just to translate the Soviet literature. So that's another big problem for us. For that reason, I think a lot of people have been translating so many books, but mostly like kind of the communist literature or some leftist idea books has been overwhelmed throughout these days. And for that reason, I think, yes, Zeyar has said, a lot of kind of the modern literature has not been introduced by the Burmese writers because Burmese writers were just exposed to kind of the leftist idea. And only the translation of some modernist and other literature after that, a lot of Burmese writers and poets started thinking of another way of presentation and another form of literature. So translation throughout it's so much related to our history of politics and the independence and then the oppression too. And then another problem is because of the censorship, not many kind of the American or the right, far right idea cannot be available here. So it is very hard especially for the writers who prefer to read more diverse idea. That's why I think in later 80s and 90s, a lot of young writers try to introduce readers and the other writers to taste what is modernism. So for that reason, our modernism, it's a little bit too late compared to the war of the modernist culture, literature. So the whole history is too much restricted, even in terms of translation, I think.
We are under the military government, that's why the institution is really poor. So concerned with the philosophy, we don't have so much books. And the Department of Philosophy is really poor in the city. And we don't have the original text of Plato, Aristotle, and the Kant, Hegel, and the Nietzsche. So from that point of view, I think philosophy is a really, really important subject, and for the country. And so the institution cannot provide us. That's why we are doing our best in the individual power. So we have maybe 2 or 3 books of, and there is world philosophers or the Chinese philosophers and maybe the continental philosopher. Only 3 or 4 books, maybe a handful of books. So we are not satisfied, and then maybe we need to translate these much more books on philosophy. And how to say, that's why it's Myanmar people, and then it's whatever is they judge on something, and then they have only the common sense. They think common sense is a really good tool and to judge, and maybe it's the artwork, or maybe the Buddha or the Jesus, or so I think it's the kind of effects is, and the side effect is because of the institution, and then is the institution. But we cannot put the blame on the institution all the time. That's why we are doing within the individual powers. So so we don't have a history of Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy as well.
Yeah, I think I will take this microphone before I lose my voice. Earlier you said, Thida, that to be able to translate across literatures and languages, you also need to translate across cultures. I'd just like to read you a quote, which was written by Coco Tet and translated by Zeyar Lynn from Burmese into English. Coco Tet says, huge linguistic and cultural untranslatabilities between Burmese and English exist, but a good poem is always translatable. Now, to me that just sounds like it's a contradictory statement, or it's possibly a paradox in terms, but I was wondering, between the three of you, and I'll start with Thida on this, are there any linguistic and cultural untranslatabilities between Burmese and, not just English, but in any other language?
Maybe I cannot directly answer your questions, and I'm going to, I chose this, and I just bring this poem just in case I might need, and now I think I need to use. This poem, indeed, when I wrote it, I didn't name its poem, but unfortunately the editor, Nanue, he decided to name it poem, and he put it in his magazine, and that's the name of the poem is, in Burmese, is Bagadi Wusan. So Bagadi is kind of the natural or the real, something like that. Wusan is the stamen of the flower, something like that. So in that case, and I just put that, I think when I explain, and I will already answer your questions. So here is the first line is all about just the name of the professions. So professor, lawyer, author, economist, politician, doctor, programmer, etc. So in that case, in Burmese it's quite fine. But in next line, I put a komya. Indeed, the direct translation of it should be shell, the shell of the animal or the nut, something like that. But the next line, what I put is some sort of the nouns: honesty, loyalty, leadership, wisdom, cooperation, altruism. So for that, I put another line in Burmese is ajenya. Indeed, I think the direct translation for aje, it should be kind of the liquid or solution or qualification. Is something qualified. The spelling of aje, it can turn out to be both meaning. So it's such a big headache for me to translate it. And then one of my, she's also half Burmese, half Chinese, and she now teaching at University of Iowa. So we both get together how to translate it. And then finally how we end up is like for a komya, we decided to put skins. And for a yimya, we decided to make it blood. So that's, I think, if it is this is very pretty hard work, because in one place I make in Burmese, that word is very hard. I invented that. It's the, I might say, Atingaya Akal. Atingaya is well known or famous. Akal is hollow or coffin. Something like that. So it's when we translate, it's really hard, you know. And Anyantara and Nick. Anyantara is anonymous, not very well known, and Nick is kind of the yellow part or the yolk of an egg, or the true essence. So in Burmese, it's beautiful. Anyantara and Chingara, it's all 4 characters, very similar, started from R. And Akal and Nick also the same. So in Burmese, totally beautiful, but it is really hard. So that's the problem we face, the translation. But I think there will be the ways to translate for a good work. I answer your question.
Would you like to pass the microphone over to Zeyar?
Translation is always a problem. Our country, Myanmar, is partially a nation of translations. Our dominant religion, Buddhism, comes from translation. Our nationalism comes from the writers of Irish Sinn Féin. Our leftist ideology came from this Negani Red Dragon Book Club. And right now, democracy movement in Myanmar is also very much based on translations. So I call this country a nation of translations, or maybe mistranslations. As Yang Lian, poet, Chinese poet, contemporary Chinese poet, wrote in his preface to contemporary Chinese poems, and there was this line which says, China, the Communist Party of China, is a child of mistranslations of Marxist writings. So, because they were mistranslated, but they did not know that they had mistranslated quite a lot of Marxist writings, Mao Zedong deemed it better to take the blame on himself, and so he called it Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. So Maoism is actually a collection of mistranslated works of Marxism, according to Yang Lian, this contemporary poet. So perhaps in our history of, in our country, in our political history, in our cultural history, I'm sure there have been lots and lots of mistranslations. But then perhaps those mistranslations have shown us a new way or alternatives. Going on with this topic of problems of translation. Now, one example would be how to translate alliteration. I'll give you an example. Now, in Burmese, bang 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 ba ba, ba 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 ba, bang 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 ba ba. In direct translation, it would be, please wear this flower steadfastly. But then, when you translated that, please wear this flower steadfastly, it loses that sonorous melody of bang 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 ba ba. So that's one problem in translating. You lose the sound aspect. That's the first victim of translation is the sound aspect. Another thing is connotations of words. Now, for example, in one of my poems, there was this line: "Asoya, asomaya." Asoya means government. Asomaya, I added this mud between aso and ya, so it became a new word, asomaya. And asomaya can be translated as ungovernable, uncontrollable, or it can go back to Burmese Buddhist doctrine of anesa, which means impermanence. So actually what I wanted to say was, the government is impermanent. This government will never last forever. Government, impermanence. Asoya, asomaya. But how would you translate it in English? Because asomaya can also mean ungovernable, uncontrollable. They have their power, they do whatever they like at their whim. Uncontrollable, ungovernable is correct. At the same time, anesa, this idea of impermanence, is also correct. So you can't have both. You have to choose one. And if you choose one, you're going to forfeit the other. When I was translating one of John Ashbery's poems, I found that each of the words that he used in his poem has different meanings. So what I did was, for every word, I would write down translate the different words and put them between slashes. So that when the reader reads this poem, the reader is free to choose any word he likes or she likes. See? But would you call that translation? Because you see, in one way, I was shirking my responsibility by not deciding on a particular word. But then, Ashbery's poems are just like that. That undecidability is there. The plurivocal meaning is there. So if I were to pick and choose just one word, would I be doing a service to Ashbery? Would I be betraying Ashbery's original poetic statement? So I translated all the words that could be translated from that particular English word to Burmese. And so this whole poem came out with slashes in each and every line. And some readers asked me why I did that. So I told them, I said, you choose any word you like. So that is a problem that I faced, but I wouldn't call it a problem. That was fun. I would call it a new way of translating.
The institution, how they can and how they can support to our translation. And for example, and then we are expressing our difficulties in translation, and then it's word to word or word by word. But for example, from English into Myanmar we translate. But our department or Myanmar and the Myanmar, and then they cannot do anything, and then they don't have a systematic plan and for the Myanmar language. So at the time the translator, they translate on the one hand, and then their thing finding some other words and in Myanmar. So and then a translator cannot do two things and at the same time. So from my point of view, I think but we translator and talking about them is that kind of problem and word by word. But from my point of view, I think it's not really enough. I think it's not really enough. So maybe we have to connect with other departments and the philosophy and the Myanmar department, and then it's a Myanmar department and the English department, and we need to discuss. I think together and about this. So this is my opinion.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'd actually like to pick up on that point, maybe about how much infrastructure is available for translators and for writers themselves. I mean, just as an example, I found a quote from the Bowker report, which stated that in 2004, all available translations globally for sale represented just over 3% of all books published in that year. And it goes on to say that the majority of that 3% was computer manuals. In terms of today, I mean, what is the community like today for translators? I mean, do you have support from the government? Do you have support from individuals? Is there a community of readers who want to read translation? It's just that it isn't available, or maybe if I can start off with on this and then pass it over.
And then our government doesn't support for the translation, and only the writer. And the writer is their hobby, or maybe some kind of mind, and then to develop our country. That's why within their power they are being translated according to their likes. But mostly they don't translate philosophical works, and because this is really maybe unfamiliar with us, and from my point of view, and psychology or political science as well. So, but And the writers and the translator is they believe that, and without the kind of books, and they cannot make another revolution, I think social revolution or cultural revolution. That's why they are putting their effort to translate, and as much as they can.
The government support for translation, I really don't notice. Even for the translation department, but I really have no idea what's going on with them, and they have been quite active after Second World War till I think 70s. But beyond that, they doing, and then also even for democracy, you know, we don't even have any Burmese word for democracy. So, and there are some personal translation is going on in the parliament. As far as I know, the speaker of the parliament, they really want to read some books, so they assign one writers to translate only for them, something like that. So it's going on. So for that reason, I think the translation cannot be truly supported by the government, and also for the market, demand is not so high, and demand is very much selective. Their demand is more on the fiction, less in some other non-fiction and academics. For that reason, we need some institution to help for translating this kind of thing. Very few people work on it, and they are not sustainable in terms of the money, but they're really dedicated to do their work. That's all I can say.
There used to be Myanmar Translation Society, but now it's become Dead Translator Society because it doesn't exist anymore. It does exist, but people are not translating anymore. It was very influential in the 60s, but it got killed off during the 70s when Ne Win clamped down on all freedom of thought and everything, and so translators working for that society stopped doing any translations. So that partially led to lack of knowledge of the following generations. Up to now, a lot of our younger people don't know much about the world because they've never read anything like in translation. We don't have any translation department in the universities. Because the English department has people who can translate, but they are not encouraged to translate. The Myanmar department, the Myanmar Burmese department doesn't want any translation because they feel that they don't need any translation because they are Myanmar, and Myanmar language is enough by itself. So we don't have any sort of translation society or group or organization. But since this topic has been brought up, I think it is time Burmese translators get together and initiate this new society, Myanmar Translation Society. Yeah? Shall we do that?
Yeah. And language and linguistic comedy of language.
Yeah.
Okay, so you heard it here first then. I mean, if Zeyar Lynn's idea comes to pan out, this will be the start of a new independent translation society. I do believe that the MTS does still exist in the Sarpe Bateman building. I have actually met, I think, the general manager and a couple of translators there. They have a very, what's what I'm looking for? Not impressive. Grand design of what they would like to see translation-wise, and I noticed on their sort of business plan that academic was number one, literary was way down on the list. I think that was like year 5 or something. Do you feel? I mean, all three of you are literary translators rather than academic, or unless I'm mistaken, on Thura. Have you published any academic translations, or is it mostly philosophical? Or philosophical translation. So the philosophical. So academic-wise, you can say so. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to know what your opinion was of the difference in the approach to academic translation and literary translation. Now I know you as a group are maybe not so experienced with academic, but perhaps you could just give your opinion on that. I'll start with the closest man to me.
Now I've been translating is post-structuralism, and then is some are from the French and the Italy, and there is the philosopher's name, and the Bataille or Agamben or Zizek or maybe Nietzsche. Maybe the difficulties and that is in translation is Bataille and the transgression and the transgression. Actually, is the philosophy of the Bataille is really unfamiliar to us, and then is this and there is a major philosophy or maybe concept is and transgression. And when I translate is this and this word into Myanmar is I use Julong Chupao. But the Julong Chupao is from the point of the Myanmar concept. Julong Chupao is maybe is we don't care the morality or we don't care the ethics, or this is the background of our and the Myanmar concept according to the Buddhism. And then actually is it connects with and another how to say is the background of and that is a Myanmar culture. So to translate is this word is a transgression into Myanmar is a Julong Chupao. I think it sounds a little bit is how to say rough. So I want to put and the Julong Jolong. Because Julong Jolong and Julong Chupao is maybe is not slightly different, I think quite different. So I prefer is Julong Jolong. Julong Jolong means is for example, the meaning of the transgression is and not to attack the taboo, and then is precede and complete it. So I think from the point of view is Julong Chupao is rough, and then maybe is from the point of the Myanmar people, and then is the Bataille is the guy is really bad, and then is maybe break down is our culture, and then is morality. So I prefer is Julong Jolong. Julong Jolong means is this is eternal and then is becoming. So I prefer Julong Jolong. So that is my and that is the experience of the is translating is philosophical works.
I think for me, I mostly translate the literary works, and the key challenge for the literary work translation is it shouldn't be the transliteration. It should cover the style and the presentation. And most of the translation in these days, a lot of people just focus on the definition and the transliteration. So that's why we lost. So yeah, as we discussed, we should focus not only on the original writers or the reader's perspective, we should just focus on the work itself, just to cover its style as it is and its meaning without changing its style, without covering its meaning. We just stuck to the work itself. That's my experience.
Just now, Thura was saying that he was talking about the difficulty of translating transgression. That brings to mind a saying by Ludwig Wittgenstein when he said, the limits of one's language is the limits of one's world. So in that way, because our Burmese language is so poor, I think people are going to beat me for that. Because Burmese language is poor in the sense that our vocabulary, our stock of vocabulary is very poor, we cannot find appropriate words to translate from English into Burmese. Like for instance, that Aung gave just now. How can we translate transgress into Burmese without losing the original sense of neutrality? If we translate to Burmese, it becomes totally negative. So it becomes like anti-culture. So we face a lot of problems in translating terms into Burmese because we don't have those terms. And instead of translating them into Burmese, I think it's better just to use the English term. Like computer, why translate computer into Burmese? Contemporary, for instance, there's a debate going on right now on how we should translate contemporary. Does it mean Kipyang of the times, or does it mean something beyond the times? Does it have a more literary, theoretical meaning towards it? So if you take the theoretical meaning, it's beyond the times. It doesn't mean today or of the times. It has another meaning, another sense. So what I've done is, if you want to talk about contemporary as today, of the time, use the Burmese word kipyak. If you want to refer to the literary term, don't use kipyak. Use the English word contemporary, which is much better. Because how can we translate communism? How can you translate democracy? So there are words that we cannot translate to Burmese. In such cases, it's better to just use the term and then explain the meaning of the term. That's one thing. And going back to what Lucas said about translating academic stuff, the problem there would be, again, how to translate technical terms into Burmese. That's going to be a big problem. And another thing is, since speaking of myself as a translator, I know that if you translate maybe 10 words of English into Burmese, it comes out like 25 words in Burmese. Because since Burmese, we don't have the equivalent, one-to-one equivalent, we have to explain some of the words in that 10-word piece. So that 10-word piece in English becomes like 25 words in Burmese. And still it may not really catch the sense, because we don't have the vocabulary. So I think as translators, we face this great challenge of how to really bring sense A from that language into Burmese. Because it's so difficult. Because when we don't have the underlying sense, you understand that foreign sense. Sometimes by translating it, we may even change the sense from a positive one to a negative one. So that's a danger that we face all the time when we're translating.
When Mo Haynes said that in translation there's a trio, the writer, the reader, and the translator himself, which is more important? I mean, when you translate, who do you translate for? Do you translate for yourself? Do you translate for the work itself? Or do you think about us readers in mind when you do it? I'll start with Zeyar on this one.
Lucas, do you know how to cook?
No.
Okay, let's say you know how to cook, all right? When you're cooking, are you cooking for yourself? Or are you cooking for someone else? Or are you just interested in what you're cooking? That's my answer.
Okay, can I respond to that? Sorry.
When I do cook, it's usually baked beans on toast, and that usually gets devoured in about 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But translation lasts a lot longer than that, doesn't it? So translation literature is for posterity, not just for 2 or 3 minutes. But no, I do take your point in kind. Yes.
For me, I think the work is the most important thing, and for me, because I'm not a assigned person to translate it, so I chose the work what I want to translate. That's started from my point of view. That's why the key thing for me is the work itself. What kind of literature, what kind of book, what kind of work I really want to work on it, and what kind of literature starts me to be translated. So the work itself is the most important thing. Even I once translated for my teen magazine, it's kind of the chicken soup book, something like that. Even for that, I still want to keep its presentation and its tone, its color, and its sort of, I might say, its style. That's the most important thing for me. So the work itself leads me how to translate.
And for me, the word is not a word, it's more than a word, because the word had a concept. And that concept, and they communicate with the people and to whom we translate. So, and I don't only focus on the word, and I also focus on the people who read it. Because for example, if I present a concept and to the people, and no matter how hard I try, but the people is very and tough and solid and then is their traditional concept, and then is we cannot and peer into their concept by a word or by words. So and I'm really and then is take care of this the word, and I translate and the people and then the targeted people. So and then is between them is I need to make a balance, and then that is my point, and that is my opinion.
Just now I told you that this anthology of translated poems by Zeyar to you helped to bring about modernism in Burma. In the late 90s and the early decade of this 21st century, a lot of people were getting fed up with the existing modern poetry. It was getting dull and there was no life in it. And so they started voicing about the need for postmodern poetry. But nobody knew what it was. They all wanted postmodern poetry. They wanted postmodernism, but they didn't know what postmodern poetry was. So I introduced this American language poetry, which was the American postmodern poetry par excellence. But a lot of people didn't like it. They said, we want postmodern poetry, we don't want language poetry. Because their concept of postmodern poetry was something which they did not know about, but they had this desire that it must be something like this. So when I said, this is the postmodern poetry you want, they said, no, we don't want this. We want postmodern poetry, not this. So that was a problem. And then later on, I translated other postmodern poems from post-Soviet Russia, and also from China, postmodern poems from China. There was some resonance in that because it was closer to the existing mainstream Burmese modern poetry. So the point I want to make is, even though you translate with your goodwill, like Thura, that you want this to have an impact on the readers, to influence the readers, to let the readers understand what is new. But the readers may not want the new. The readers have their own somehow fuzzy idea of newness, and they want that newness. They don't want the real new. So if you get the new, they will not like it. And that's been my experience. So now what I've done is I've translated a book by this American poet, Dean Young. He is post-language poetry, postmodern. He's like the poet in America right now. And that is now being received very well because that poem is not so post-structuralist, postmodern. It's more, it's closer to the mainstream poetry. So I hear that a lot of people are buying that book, which I'm happy about. So in terms of translation, we need to, we cannot guarantee that whatever we translate will go in accordance with our goodwill, for example, or our aim of, having an impact on the audience. It may have a negative impact.
Now this point is it connects to the manipulation, because it is the reader, and then the reader is they are reading and they are judging the book and the translation, and then it's by their common sense. That's why at the time is the translator, and then they can manipulate, and then they can manipulate the readers, and I saw this book. Actually, the title in English is From Sex to Super Consciousness. And he translated in Myanmar is Lunge and Galgo Swan and then is the power of sex. So it is quite different, and then is the miss out the concept of the original writer. Actually, it is not the power of sex. Actually, it's how to go is from sex to the consciousness concerned with the spirituality. So and then is our topic connects to the manipulation. So okay.
Okay, so Zeyar, you said that sometimes the reader doesn't want to doesn't understand what they want. So your role as a translator for all three of you is to educate the readers in informing what they want. I just like to read a little quote that you wrote. I think this was for a Singapore Writers Festival. You said your aim in translating poems from English into Burmese is to tell Burmese what the rest of the world, how the rest of the world and why the rest of the world writes what they do. Would this not be also true for English to Burmese? Sorry, from Burmese to English. Does the rest of the world need to know not just what Burmese writers are writing, but also how and why they are writing? Do you think this is a critical point for the rest of the world to understand? I'll start with Martina, maybe on this.
Yeah, for that reason, we need to translate in that way too. And I think back to the formal topics and the manipulation, and I think more on the academic works, it needs to aim for the readers, because most of the academic work is just to educate the others, the readers. But for the literary work, it's beyond, I think. For that reason, we need to be a little bit conscious about what kind of works we are working on it. And then, for that reason, even for the from Burmese to English, we also need to think that way too. If you work on the Burmese literature, the literary works, to be translated into English, we still need to start with the how and why Burmese writers write this work, something like that. But if, for example, like some news stories or some more like the non-fiction stuff, it's okay just to make a transliteration, just to tell the whole world what's going on here. But if you do the translation from Burmese literary works into English, we need to go beyond.
Of course, the world too needs to know about Myanmar in terms of literature at least. But then the problem is, who's going to translate it to English? And so we have this the problem of who's going to translate. And another thing is, instead of the translator translating a Burmese piece into English, I think it would be better if there is a collaboration, when both the original writer and the translator work together, and that would bring out the real sense. If not, there could be some meaning shifting, and which would misrepresent the original writer's sense or direction or aim. So again, who is going to translate? Now, for example, like I said just now, I prefer to translate from English to Burmese. I'm more comfortable with that. But I'm not comfortable in translating from Burmese to English. If I have to, I will do it, but I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. So if there were a native speaker foreigner who is a good translator, because translation is a skill in itself, who is a skilled translator, in that case, I wouldn't mind working together with that person. So I think we need that collaboration. Yeah?
And the key point is manipulation, and then is the translator is how to say is one time, and how to say, he translate means he has been expressing the new idea and the concept to the Myanmar people, for example. At the same time he has been attacking there are former and the concepts. So we have been doing two works at a time, and from my point of view. So, and then this is, I think, the, how to say, the process of the deconstruction, I hope. So, and then from English into Myanmar, we have the kind of process, and from Myanmar into English, and we have the kind of process. So, if we don't take care of the kind of process, I think, even though we have a good intention, that we may manipulate the reader, and then Myanmar or the world, I think.
So the best system of translation is collaboration between the original author and the translator, yeah. So what do you do when the original author is dead?
In that case, do the free translation.
Free translation. I'm glad you said that because I'd just like to quote Coco Tet, who said that the translator must be creative and take all necessary liberties. A free translation. Does that include the invention of words or the insertion of words, phrases that don't exist in the original text, but because the author is dead, there is no, what's the word, ownership issues perhaps?
I think it goes back to the intention of the translator. If the translator wants the reader to experience this poem written in a foreign language into his or her own language, I think the reader, it would be better for the reader if the reader can experience the translated word in between native language and foreign language. What I mean is, if the sense is too foreign, the reader will not understand because it's beyond his experience, it's beyond his knowledge, it's beyond, even beyond his sensibility. But one reason of translating works is to broaden the reader's sensibility or mind or way of thinking or sense even. So in that case, it should go maybe a few steps beyond what the reader is already familiar with. So I think in order to get to that, let's call it a third space, yeah? That in-between space. In order to get to that space, I think the translator has the right to play with language in order to give this work more life to the reader. Yeah? Because it happened in Bowls of Crow. Again, if you read the original Burmese and if you read the translation, you will see slight changes. But then, if you don't read the Burmese original, you just read the English poem, you like it very much. Sometimes, in some cases, the translation is much better than the original poem. Sometimes the original is better than the translation. So we also come across that.
Yeah, I think the nature of these two languages itself is very much different. That's play a very crucial role if we translate from one language to the another, and also related to the cultural difference. That's why it's really hard. And then there should be some kind of as Lynn said, there should be some thought space liberty to manipulate in order to match the translation into the translated language and the culture. Otherwise, it's hard for the readers to understand or to think beyond its translation. That's one thing.
Another problem in translating is, like Seba said, this cultural problem. Now, for instance, this Japanese writer Haruki Murakami's Norwegian Wood has been translated to Burmese, and some people are saying that its eroticism is blue, which is not true at all. But then, if you look at it from let's say, a common Burmese readers, from his eyes or her eyes, he or she might think this book contains parts in which the characters were making love. So this person might read it as pornography, soft porn. But then we know that it's not that. So it also depends on the reader's, shall I say, level of culture or level of international culture. So if I were to say that, a lot of patriotic Burmese would go against that. They would say, I'm belittling Burmese people. I'm not doing that. But there is this this sort of level at which, saying that the Burmese person at this level can jump up to the international level. But some people cannot go up to that. They are a bit down there, below that level, below the international level. So such kind of people would not see that translation as opening their eyes or broadening their horizon. They will see that as in a negative way, because of culture. But then when I use this word culture, for me, My understanding of culture is alive, it's a living thing. But for a lot of common people, culture is something that is fixed, and they try to match whatever they see with that fixed idea. So I think that's also a problem in translation.
And political context and cultural context is also playing an important role in the translation, I think. Yeah, political context is like a superstructure, and then is cultural context is like an infrastructure. And as you know, is maybe 2 years ago, and then is a political context, and for the translator is really bad, and moreover is and then we saw the seeds, and then is for the infrastructure. So maybe it's like a Buddhist thought. Actually, this is a so-called Buddhist thought. Actually, and is now is we don't have a military government, but is their Caesar is working now. And so, how to say, and then is the cultural context. And now is the cultural context is and is really going against the translation, I think, because is the culture of the Myanmar people, and then is they are really superstitious in religion, and then is they cannot accept any other philosophy, and other is and finally thoughts, and so because is they want to be stable, and then is the concept of the culture, and from the point of the Myanmar people is really and rigid. So and to translate is philosophical books, and then is to enter into the Myanmar culture and Myanmar cultural context. So maybe in this point is the translator of the philosophy. They are, how to say, is facing against with the whole society, I think.
In 2007, PEN International did a report on literary translation around the world, and they said that English-speaking cultures should open themselves and increase the number of translations into English if they want to be a real bridge between cultures. So, as translators, is that how you see yourself? As that?
Is that how you see yourself, as the bridge between cultures? Maybe if I can start.
Partially yes, because if we want to enter the family of the world, we have to go through English. So translation is really important. But some people might not like that because do smaller developing countries have to enter this family just through the doorway of Anglicization? Why don't the powers that be, the superpowers, learn the language of the smaller developing countries? Why don't they learn Burmese? Why don't they learn Burmese in order to know about our country? Why do we have to translate ourselves into English? So that is also a sort of a political problem that's going on. And another thing is, let's not talk about international yet, let's just talk about our country. How can a poet writing in his or her language like Chin or Kachin or Mon or Rakhine, that poet can never achieve the status of a poet without writing in Burmese. And that is a stark example of Burmanization in this country. All the national races have to use Burmese in order to become somebody, in order to be to join the literary world, for example. So in that case, what Lucas is doing now is working with the minority races, their language, and translating them into Burmese. Why is that? Why is that one way? Why aren't the Burmese people learning the language of the national races? Does it go back to the sense of power? So it's like national races have to learn Burmese to enter the Burmese world. In the same way, developing countries have to go through this English translation to join the world. So maybe there is some kind of unbalanced power relationship there going on.
Yeah, I do agree much on that. But we also need to look at the nature of the language itself also in terms of translation. Because I think for the English, compared to Burmese language, it is much more simple, I think. So for that reason, and for that sense, I think, compared to once some people come up with the world's language rather than the English, as I think Esperanto, something like that. So it's fair why it is, but because I think the nature of the English language itself is quite simple to adapt in any language-speaking society. So we need to look at so many different aspects. One might be purely kind of the power related, since the British itself has been overwhelmed all over the world and its Anglicanization, whatever. It's played one crucial role, but the nature of the language also played one role. And for the ethnic languages, that's the problem, I think. Some of our ethnic languages, they don't even really have their own character. So they just have some sort of the songs itself, something like that. So for that reason, they should work on its language and linguists for getting recognized more in any sort of culture or society. Otherwise, it's really hard to reach out. So in different way, I think, we need to look at in different opposite ways, not only in terms of the power politics, but also in terms of nature of the language and the linguist, I think.
Sorry, just before I do open up to the floor, I do have a personal question, and then I'll let everybody else have a go. Talking about, I think, minority languages, like I said before, a lot of my work is involved with the Klien, the Kaya, the Kachin, the Chin. Ignoring the fact that, for example, in Chin State they have 53 sub-languages and they don't have a dominant one. Ignoring that whole geopolitical problem there. The issue that I'm facing is the translation from the original ethnic minority language. So, for example, Kayol, we have stories in Kayol language. Finding a literary translator from Kayol to English, I don't even know if there is one in the world. Finding a translator from Kayol to Burmese is not that easy, but it does exist. Now, I suppose our only option is to then translate from the Burmese into the English. Now, I have an inherent problem with that, and I think it somehow loses ownership of the original language. It loses the power of the original story. But if there's no other option, and in your opinion, is that a viable option, or should the story just not be translated into English?
Well, I'm sure it should be translated in English, but then I think it's a matter of give and take. How much you win, how much you lose. If it's not translated in English, the world will never know about them. And if you want to, go into the nitty-gritty things, then it will never get translated. So I suppose it depends on your aim, your intention, your stand. I think the last thing you can say is, I'm doing it for the good of some certain things, so you can forget about it if you're not interested.
From my point of view, I think translation is not the absolute, I think, yeah? But nowadays we are talking about the translation as the absolute, that's why maybe it's exact, I think, yeah?
Okay, all right, we have, more people came in when we were talking. Shall we open the floor to some questions? I think we have a couple of microphones without cables. Yeah, okay.
I'm Hanzo and Raja. I want to question to the Zeyar. We have a lot of adaptation work from the world literature, especially I mentioned about the text, and I didn't like about the original books on the text. but I really I like about the adaptation work of the Kimpata. This means Masahu. And what's your opinion or comment or anything on the adaptation work? And another question is, Siamang Danu used the romanticism, and Siamang translate to the Burmese word romantica. But another critic of Siamang disagree in the romantica. So I have problems. What can I decide about the translation work? Thank you, sir.
Your first question was adaptation. I think adaptation and translation are two different things, of course. And in terms of translation, you are keeping the foreignness intact. You are telling the reader that this is not a local produced stuff, that this has come from abroad, but in terms of for the reader to read about this, you translate it into in the Burmese, for example. But in terms of adaptation, like it becomes a Burmese story with Burmese characters, so it loses the foreignness. So I think it depends on the taste of the reader. I mean, if they want this adapted into Burmese culture, into Burmese life, it's up to them. Or if they want to keep the work as a foreign work, as a translation, then I think the translators would, like for example, I would rather translate than adapt. Yeah? And concerning this, coming up with a new Burmese word for romantic, and for Burmese is romantica, I know that this is again a controversial issue because if there is no concept of this word in the Burmese language or Burmese culture or the Burmese sphere of understanding and knowledge, then I think it's better to just take that word and adopt it as Burmese, because we've adopted so many foreign words. So why not just adopt it as romantica? Yeah. Is there any Burmese word for democracy up to now? If you can come up with a Burmese word for democracy, I think you're going to lose a sense of democracy as some kind of a power. See, so I think I can agree with say Aung when Aung said that this should be romantic. The word romantic should be translated in Burmese. That's not a good way, because in our world of poetry, when modernism was translated into kitball, that term destroyed the whole concept of modernism. So that's why modernism in Burmese poetry had not a very stable beginning, because when the word was translated in Burmese as kitball, it lost the meaning of experimentation, it lost the meaning of avant-gardism, it lost that sense of making something new. Rather, it became to write about what's happening today. So if you translate a literary term, for instance, into Burmese, it will lose the whole sense, it will lose the whole meaning of the concept. So I would rather use the concept itself than translate it into Burmese.
Hello.
Okay, I just wanted to, well, 2 comments. One on the translation of Translation Society and what the government might be doing to assist translation. I think one really important thing that the government is doing is that it doesn't have a copyright law. And there are actually an incredible number of books now that are translated from English into Burmese that, I mean, obviously wasn't possible to do before, but I'm really amazed when I go around bookstores here how many books are now in Burmese. I mean, they're not literary books, I admit, but in terms of economics, management, politics, what's going on in the world. I mean, there's a lot of books translated into Burmese, and that would not be possible if there was a copyright law. So I'm sorry, all the authors that might be suffering as a result of that, but it is a very it's an important point, because there will be one day, and then it'll be much more difficult. The other thing I wanted to ask about was in terms of translating from Burmese into English. As there is, the languages are very difficult, but one other thing that is very important about Burmese is that Burmese writers are very used to having to write in a very roundabout way, being under censorship, and I think I actually think that the book Inked Over Ripped Out should be reproduced again, Thida. I think you should put that pen because it really shows the notes in it. It's a book of short stories written by Burmese during the military period that were all censored and were not allowed to be published, and it has copious notes explaining the very clever ways that the authors used to criticize the government without criticizing the government. And the notes and it was a collaboration. I know it took a very long time, and Vicky and Anna and Thida, great job on it. But Burmese writing is very opaque when you're trying to translate it into English, and the idea of having to collaborate is a very important one, I think. What the view is about all.
Yeah, so many questions you asked. Yeah, I think the positive side effect of the sort of the authoritarianism is we can translate books without having copyright, something like that. So it's sort of. But yeah, as you said, literary works is rarely being translated. I think it's beyond 80s, especially after the military government took the power. Before that, it's related to we lost the Tandej, and after that, after he passed away, there is very few literary works has been translated, and that's why the copyright law. Yeah, it's the problem of the copyrights. It's not only about copyright law. If the intellectual property rights, it's also about the patent. So for that reason, it's so much controversial things for us to consider to establish IPR as soon as possible or later when we are ready, something like that. So that's one issue. And another issue is, of course, the translation in Ink Over Rip Out. It's show a lot of problem. And I think the nature of our Burmese language itself is as rich as possible. It says it's beautiful, but for the English language, the nature itself is as brief as possible. Is beautiful. So the nature contradicts each other for the one thing, and on the other hand, because of the censorship, very heavy censorship, here writers always think indirect. That's only that's also contributed to have our works so much indirect and so much using so many layers of symbolism, so many kind of the indirect vocabulary or even songs. When we name some characters, we use a lot of the songs to imagine, to read between the lines, beyond the text, something like that. So that's one reason. The censorship always shape the thinking, the way of practice of the writers. I do agree. So for the English, for writers, the Burmese writer to write in English, why not? We should try. Yeah, we do have a brilliant Burmese writers who can write in English in the past. That's why with not much confidence, I wrote my book, The Roadmap in English. That's my try. I really want my other writers to try, and we should also work on it. We start thinking in the different language way to portray our feeling to the world. We really do need to encourage that.
Also, do you have these writers like Dr. Milchit and Sanchaung, who usually wrote in the Guardian in the newspapers in English, and Sanchaung, I think CTO, and we had that generation of writers who were able to write well in English about our country. But later on, after I think 1980s, what happened was there was this national spirit of anti-imperialism, anti-British, anti-Westernization, anti-English. Everything was anti. And when I went to the English, I have a BA degree in English from Institute of Education. Now, there's a history behind it. In 1964, the Minister of Education said that English was unnecessary, that English was unnecessary in academia because if these stuff can be translated in Burmese, who needs to read in English? And the teaching of English was downgraded. And in 1979, when I attended the English major, it was not as an individual university department like history department or geography department or some other departments. It was like a small subject department, a mini department under Institute of Education. Now the reason was that General Lynn did not allow English major as to become prominent. So people like Professor L.J. Kanji and Ding, they kept this English department alive hidden under the Institute of Education. It was only in 1982-83 that the government allowed English major to be a university subject in Yangon University. So during the 80s, 90s, and up to now, there is this, I think, extreme patriotism, because people keep saying Burmese language is our language and all that, patriotic sentiments. And those patriotic sentiments are not, they don't favor translation. And at that time, we had this Zeyar, who was a very good translator. He translated a lot of leftist works, both short stories, novels, and poems. But at that time, the people who were working in this Myanmar Translation Society, they had to toe the party line and translate the stuff that would not have any um, um, totally according to the government. So what Zeyar did was to translate things that were anti-government. So even in the world of translation during that time, we had this split between the pro-G translators and anti-G translators. And among the readers too, there were those who would read the original Burmese, and they would feel proud that these books were written by original Burmese. There's no, they were not translated, and translated books were considered inferior to the original because they have been translated. They did not come from the heart of the writer and stuff like that. So, so because of that, even in the English department at that time, I had these, my classmates who were very good in English, but they did not become translators. Because they too went through this sense of, that translation is what an inferior person would do. A better person with literary genius or with his creative mind would write something original. So translation was not considered on par with the original. It was considered inferior. So that was one thing. Even if people were able to translate English, they would not do it. Another thing was income. Translators did not get any good income. Samuel Tante died very poor, although he wrote those novels. And other well-known translators too, they all went through a very poor life. So translation was not good for income, no financial stability in that. In terms of literary work too, translation was considered inferior. So there were a lot of things that were against translating at that time. I think even up to now.
Actually, they want to present to the world is how Myanmar are really polite and religious and so the kind of things I think. But I think it's they are under the power of the Buddhism. So maybe it's the people, especially the reader of the world, is they cannot know the real and the life of the Myanmar people by reading their articles or books. I think. So this is I think another very important weakness I think.
Yeah, I think I can project my voice. It's okay. I just have a question, and by the way, I'm also a product of BD, English Region. Yeah. I just have a question to the panel. I mean, you've talked about the pitfalls of translation. Do you think it's a conscious manipulation by the translator, where the preference for certain terms is subjective? Or do you think it's a choice between technicality or poetic license? And that's my one question. Another question is, have you ever thought of the impact of translations in society? We talk about manipulation. Have you thought about its impact? Selma also talked about layers of symbolism. In my work, one particular issue that we often come across is the word human rights, where the English word, we have and democracy, which is in Burmese, it's grammatically taken into democracy, where it becomes something that is a given and not an inherent thing. Another, this is just a in a lighter way, but it's an actual fact. In northern Rakhine, UNHCR has a problem with its name because they are called, So the question that the UN was often asked is, how can you call a certain group of people Dokade? Because we are all Dokade in life, you see? And we are stumped. You're completely stumped because everybody is a Dokade, you see? So yeah, I was just hoping that you might be able to shed some light into that.
Yeah, but I think the answer is, you've already provided the answer yourself. In this example, democracy period. Democracy is not a layman's term. Democracy is a political term. And whenever we try to translate technical terms into layman terms, we always face the problem. So the most we can do is explain rather than have a word-to-word translation. Because for one thing, throughout our whole Burmese history, starting from King Anorta, we Burmese people never had one sense of democracy. We never enjoyed democracy. Maybe during Unu's time, where there was parliamentary democracy, but even then, it was that voice was not as loud as the voice of leftist communism. So when we are translating those terms into Burmese, it's difficult because we don't have, the Burmese language itself doesn't have that concept. And then we Burmese people too don't have the concept. We Burmese people have the concept of obedience, which has been brought down to us from the time of King Noita. Another thing is this, like this UNHCR. When you translate it to Dokade, maybe we need to qualify that by saying Sibi Dokade or Dabawa Bi Dokade, for refugees. And then another thing is Maha Minji. It sounds so grand in Burmese, Maha and Min, the great king. So this organization belongs to the great king. And for uneducated people, Maha Minji is a frightening word because the common Burmese people are afraid of Maha and power and gun and soldier and Siboji and everything. So when you have that term, it puts fear into people's minds because of the cultural sense that's embedded in Dokade and Maha Minji. So maybe we need to be more diplomatic, more tactful, and have to consider the cultural underpinnings of words too, because translation is now beyond moving one language to another. Translation is now moving one culture to another. When the receiving culture does not have the concept of the giving culture, it's going to cause problems. But I would call that teething problems. Maybe if we wait for next decade, people will come to understand, hopefully, and this problem will go away. But then there will be new words coming in, and this problem will go on and on, I think.
The question was its impact on society, you see. Because when you have the concept of beat it, down it, like in human rights and democracy, it already creates a sense of conflict. And that has been the major cause since '88, where the word democracy and human rights, down you demand something, you see. And that is that is something that I was wondering if you might have given some thought to, because of the translation of the word. It has, in our society, a major impact on how we view these concepts.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Actually, like you said, democracy is inherent as human rights. We don't have to ask for democracy, or somebody up there is so benevolent enough to say, okay, people, here's democracy, I give you the democracy. So that's what I said. When we have to translate, for example, democracy into Burmese, it's not just translating one word from another. It's translating the whole concept into the receiving concept, or the receiving culture. But when the receiving culture does not have that concept, I think just translating the term itself is not enough. We have to explain the whole thing about democracy, that it is inherent, that's your inborn right, our inborn right. So I think that involves more than just translation. And like you said, how it impacts society depends on how much work the translator has to do. Or maybe it's more than what the translator has to do. It may be what other people have to go on to do. Like, for example, Buddha preached something, But then the Atakadasias had to explain that, to expound that. So I think the translator may translate democracy or the idea of democracy, but there should be people who won't explain what democracy is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. May I just add something? I always deny to say Lu Kwenye for human rights, and I always prefer to say Lu Yat Bai Kwen. We do have terms, but the problem is some of the translators, they know English pretty well, but they don't know Burmese pretty well. That's another big problem, I think. Yeah, that's why for the translator, they better learn both language pretty well, and they can manipulate at its best capacity. That's more important. That's why I think as Pan Myanmar, I really want to do some wording, unwording, and rewording campaign. I really want to unword Lu Kwen Ye, and we want to reword as Lu Ya Bai Kwen, something like that. And another problem of Burmese language itself is in any kind of writing, literary works or the academic work, we rarely use footnotes. In Burmese language, there is no kind of the footnotes tradition. That's also make us too hard to make translation. For example, like for democracy, we can just put footnotes, saying, elaborating every detail in the footnotes. But in Burmese language itself, it's rarely. Footnotes kind of that thing, a lot of people expect it's kind of the academic translation, only in the non-fiction book, not in the literary books, the literary works. That's another big problem. That's why, for example, like when I got crushed is when someone translate Lurain Jama, Aung Jama Takore Natama. So it's a terrible translation because that phrase really wants to keep its rhyme. That's the problem, I think. To keep it rhyme and the translation is totally got wrong, even for the essence and the message. So I think the problem is manipulation in translation from English to Burmese is the translator should learn not only English but also Burmese pretty well. And we also need to change the nature of the language and the presentation of the language in the book. Why don't we put the footnotes if we do need? So we should just translate and put the words, the transliterate word or the change the pronunciation, just put in the text itself, and we should follow the text, the footnotes, and elaborate what does it mean. That's how we can tackle. And we can also just unword about the Dukha de Maha Minji, something like that. We need to do that campaign. I also want to do proverbing. Some of the proverbs, Burmese proverbs, are terrible. It is terrible proverbs. And Kalamanai Yakaime. Some proverbs are so terrible. So I really want to do proverb and unwording as a campaign. If all of our writers do agree, why don't we do?
And here. And what I want to say here is not is we cannot divide between the translator and is a literary credit, I think. And that is in Myanmar is we don't have a lot of literary credit. Actually, is what you were talking about is I think this is personally the duty of the literary critic, I think, yeah, because the literary critic criticizes not only the literature but also the constitution and the curriculum. And then is in our Myanmar curriculum we see is a Nabongle. And the Nabongle is an object and the glass or the head or the table. So what about the game? So we need actually is the good literary critic in Myanmar, I think.
We have about 10 more minutes for a question.
English to Burmese translation. Is that, I just want to know, is that for the benefit of your audience, or is that a, or Myanmar sort of Burmese language or Burma Saga or Myanmar Saga
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't speak Burmese, so I have no idea what she said.
You want to know why we keep saying Burmese rather than Myanmar? Well, to speak for myself, I think it's just my habit, because I've been so used to, calling our country Burma and Burmese. So it's just a habit. It has nothing to do with intentionally not using Myanmar. But if you like it, I can start using it now. Myanmar language.
I think it's a tongue tie. If we talk in our own language, we might say Myanmar. But if we are forced to talk in English language, we automatically use Burmese or Burma. It's like a tongue tie or the legacy of the colonialism.
The dominant race of among how many 140 races, like they say. So the same question was asked when I was giving this talk in New York, and this person asked me, why didn't I use the word Myanmar? So I said, Myanmar stands for the country. Burmese stands for the language, and the poems here have been written in the Burmese language. We don't have a Myanmar language. Actually, we have different languages of the national races. But because of this, the Burmese race becoming dominant, the Burmese language too has become Myanmar language. But in terms of linguistics, there is just Burmese language, not Myanmar language.
Is it a question of grammar also?
Myanmar and...
Yeah, I mean, Burmese is an adjective. Myanmar is a noun, you see, and we are using it both as a noun and an adjective.
They tried to cover the Myanmar as an adjective. They failed. So, I don't know, personally, I think I use Burmese. Sometimes I use it to deliberately differentiate between the linguistic aspect and the political aspect. And I'm also against Burmanization of this country. I'm against that. I prefer all the national races to have equal rights in this country. So that's why I use this term Burma as a sort of indirect political instigation. I may be wrong, but I can't help it.
Can I ask one question? For the Myanmar spelling is it correct for the pronunciation? Myanmar. M-Y-A-N-M-A-R. Is it the right?
In phonetically,
sound,
yeah.
phonetic?
Myanmar, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But some
Myanmar.
some said no. I don't know why. Like Myanmar.
Well, phonetically it'd be like M-E-E-Y-A-N-M-A-R.
So
people come down to like Myanmar. My mom pronounces it Myanmar.
So you think it's not correct?
I don't know if it's my position as a foreigner to say if it's incorrect or correct, to be honest. I try, as a foreigner, I try not to wade into this whole sort of etymological roots confusion between Myanmar, Burmese, Burma. A lot of the traveling that I do around the ethnic minority states, I never hear the word Burma. I hear Myanmar and then whatever nationality they are, national race they are. But I guess phonetically, yeah, it's not spelled correct, but many things in the English language aren't. So, cough, for example. Thank you.
Okay, well, is that on? Yes. Hello.
I guess we can wrap it up here then. So I would just like to say thank you very much to all three panelists for today. It's been 2 hours of very interesting and educational discussion. I hope the audience has enjoyed it as well and learned some new things. I'm going to give the last word to Ilaria, unless our three panelists have anything else they would like to add.
I just want to thank everybody for coming here tonight, and it's a special thank you to our speakers and our moderator. It's truly a great honor for us to have you in our program. Now I invite everybody to enjoy some refreshments back there. I invite you to check the books, and of course I invite you to support PEN Myanmar with a donation. If you want, there is a basket here, or joining their Literary Thursday that they organize once a month. Every third Thursday.
October is 16.
Okay, so the next one will be October 16th. And of course, if you're willing to be in their mailing list, in our mailing list, please sign the book at the entrance. Thank you very much. Thank you.